Hi everyone, and welcome to this recording. It's going to be a follow-up of the sessions we did earlier where we converted an AEM 6.5 project into one that was compatible with AEM as a cloud service. So what we did is we took the weekend AEM guides project from GitHub, the oldest one available, so that the conversion could be as complicated as possible. So that's version 0.0.2. And then we used AEM's modernization tools, which use a YAML file for configuration to then convert the repository into something that's compatible with AEM as a cloud service. So we filled in the configurations, we ran the conversion from our terminal by running the command. It restructured the repository according to our configurations, and it generated this target folder, and in here was the completed converted project. So what you can see from here is that there is not a dispatcher folder. It got removed in the conversion. So we just didn't worry about that at the beginning. We were worried about the repository. So we just took these Maven modules, we fixed them up. There were some manual changes that we had to make. And then we moved them into their own separate project. So that's this one right here. Made sure that it works locally. Once it worked locally, we then push it to AEM as a cloud service, and it's currently running in our environment over there. Okay. Now I want to talk about the dispatcher. So because there wasn't one that was generated during the conversion, we do obviously need one. So the one that we got from GitHub, it does come with a dispatcher folder. And the AEM modernization tools, they too have a dispatcher converter section that we could use to convert a dispatcher module, an older one, into something compatible with AEM as a cloud service. As you can see from these configurations, we have settings for an on-premise dispatcher deployment that we want to convert, or one for AMS. This weekend project was built for AMS, so these are the configurations that we would need to fill in. But as you can see, it says immediate expected subfolders conf.d, conf.dispatcher.d, and conf.modules.d. So these four folders are expected, but in the one that we have here provided by Adobe with this project, we only see conf.d and conf.dispatcher.d. In AEM as a cloud service, the conf folder and the conf.modules.d folder, they're no longer needed. So part of the conversion is actually to remove these folders. So because they don't exist in the project that in the dispatcher module that we got from GitHub, we can assume that this particular dispatcher configuration is already pretty close to what we need for AEM as a cloud service. So rather than running this conversion tool, I'm just going to copy this dispatcher folder from the old AEM 6.5 project into this new one. Okay, so it has been copied. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to validate the configuration using AEM's validator tool. I'm going to run a local Docker instance to actually run a dispatcher instance against a local publisher and make sure it's currently running correctly as expected. Once we have that, and once the validation has passed to make sure that the files are compatible with AEM as a cloud service, I'm going to include it into my project, add it to our Git repository, and then run a pipeline to install this module in AEM as a cloud service and see how the dispatcher functions with these files. So I have my local publisher that's running on localhost 4503. The converted project is already installed here and running, as you can see. So the next step here is to run the validator and make sure all the files that we copied over are indeed compatible with AEM as a cloud service. So here we are back into the migrated AEM project. Here is the dispatcher folder that I just copied over, and I'm going to run the validation against it. So here I am in my terminal. Here's that dispatcher folder, and I actually made some shortcuts for these tools, so you can actually see them here. I'll open them up. So I have a validate dispatcher alias, which basically just invokes the bin/validate shell script from my AEM SDK root, which is sitting up here inside of my Adobe folder. So I've got my SDK root, I'm invoking the validate shell script, and I'm invoking it on the dispatcher source folder relative to my current location in the terminal. So that's why I am currently in my project folder. I'm going to run AEM as a cloud service, validate dispatcher, and start the validation process. Okay, so not surprisingly, we do have errors. The first issue is that an immutable file called conf.d, so basically our default vhost file has been changed. So probably the version or the file that came with the dispatcher folder, the dispatcher module from AEM's weekend project on GitHub, it's not the one that AEM as a cloud service expects. So the validator is complaining about it. So let's go and pull the latest version of the default.vhost. Because we're looking at the default.vhost, this is not a file that we can modify, obviously, because it's meant to be immutable. So replacing it with the out-of-the-box one is a safe procedure. Okay, so as you can see, we have a check is successful message at the end of this latest validation that I just ran. This is phase 3. So it does go through 3 phases, this validation process, and you can see them outputted in this log here. So where does it start? Okay, great. Phase 1, dispatcher validator. So in this first phase, it makes sure that there's no syntax errors in your files. Then we have phase 2, where it actually runs your scripts inside of a Docker image and makes sure that they do properly compile and execute without any issues. And then lastly, it's phase 3, where it checks all the files for immutability issues. So all those are done. And it is worth noting that phase 2, where it does require a Docker image, it won't run if you don't have Docker up and running. So as you can see from my taskbar up here, my desktop Docker is running. And you'll even be able to see that as the validation goes through, you'll temporarily see a container kick up. So here, I'll run the validation one more time. And you can see that Docker is is kind of loading in and out as the validation goes through. So anyway, all the validations have passed, and we can move on to the next step. I'm just going to mention real quick which files I had to modify. So here they are all still open. So default vhost, default rewrite rules, default vhost.conf, default rules.any, default client headers, default filters, and default farm. So basically just about everything with default in it. Okay, so now that all our validations have passed, our next step is to make sure that this dispatcher module does run successfully in a local Docker image. So that's going to run on localhost 8080. As you can see, that currently is not running because we don't currently have a Docker image going. What I'm going to do is I'm going to invoke AEM as a cloud service run Docker. Before I do that, I'll just bring up the command that I'm simulating. So there we go. So run Docker runs this command right here. Basically, what we're telling it to do is we're telling it to take the docker.run shell script from our dispatcher SDK root in our dispatcher SDK tools, and then invoke it on the dispatcher source folder, which is going to be, again, a relative path. So we have to run this command from inside of our project folder, and that we're going to run it off of a publisher running at port 4503, and we're going to run the Docker image at port 8080. So going to run that. So AEM as a cloud service, run Docker, and when this runs, it'll create a container, as you can see here. And now we should be able to refresh our localhost 8080 and see that it's currently running properly. Okay, so if we want to be squeaky clean about this, we can go ahead and also attempt to make a change in our authoring environment and make sure that it does propagate through into our Docker dispatcher. So I'm opening here the Weekend USEN homepage, and I'm just going to add a quick component to it. So let's just go in here. We'll add a title component. It's just going to say English because that's the title of the page. We're going to publish this. And since this is the first time I'm publishing something, everything is getting published, all those assets as you just saw. Okay, and I'm going to refresh now my publisher first and make sure that that component did make it through, and it did not. Probably because my replication agent isn't running. So in a cloud environment, in AEM as a cloud service, we use Sling content distribution in order to activate content and move it from the author to the publisher. That obviously is only available in a cloud environment. Locally, we do need to set up our replication agents. So I'm going to go into etc/replication and fire this guy up. So up here in URI, I'm going to put in my publisher, which is running at 4503. The user is going to be admin. In settings, I have to enable it, and I don't believe we need a user ID. Okay, so all that is sorted, and let's test this out, and we are good. Okay, so now that that's up and running, let's try and, that actually might be sufficient because it's probably queued, all that stuff. So let's see if that is enough to get it going. It is not. Okay. There's nothing in the queue. Fair enough. Okay, let's go ahead and publish it again. Okay, everything's getting published. That's a good sign. Okay, so that completed. Let's refresh our publisher. And we have nothing. Great. Okay, it took our publisher down. Why is that? Okay, well, let's have a look under the hood. So I'm going to go ahead and log in to my publisher. Already logged in from a previous session, so I can go straight to CRXDE, and let's have a look in here. So inside of content, we still have our pages, so those were not removed. Our EN is using the template at conf weekend settings, so let's make sure we still have that. Conf weekend settings, WCM templates. Here's our landing page. And our landing page is using a resource type of weekend components. Let's see, weekend component structure page. So here we have weekend components, and we have no structure. Okay. All right, is that correct? So if we look here inside of our project, under UI.content, we have a conf folder, and inside of here, it is telling us that the structure node is indeed using a resource type of weekend component structure page. And inside UI.apps, do we have this here? Weekend components structure page. We do. So okay, so what probably happened is we never built it to the publisher. So we have, yeah. So we built to the author, and the author had these templates, and this template told it to use the resource type of weekend component structure page, which it didn't have, which the publisher didn't have. So it was, yeah, okay. So we were obviously using an older version of the weekend project on the publisher. So not a problem. Let's go ahead and build it. So I'm going to stop my Docker image just for a second so I can build to my publisher. Okay, so here I am again in my project, and I'm going to run a maven clean install -p auto install package publish. Just going to make sure that that is indeed the correct profile. So here I am in my project under the parent POM. And it is indeed auto install package publish. That's going to send it to my AEM publish port, which presumably is 4503. Perfect. So I'm going to run this build, pause the recording, and come back when it's done. Okay, so my build succeeded, and I can go back into my failed publisher page and refresh it. And we have some issues. So this is probably because my bundle hasn't started. We probably need an up-to-date version of the AEM SDK. So let me go ahead and confirm that. We can go into my system console, and we can see that the Weekend Sites project is indeed installed and not started. So this is indeed a version problem. And a good way to fix this is just to make sure that we're running with the same SDK version. So here, if I go to product information, you can see I'm running with 2020.2.6433. I'm going to check the same thing on my author, and we can see that we are running with 2020.4. So an older version on the publisher. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my publisher altogether and use the same jar as I have on my author server in order to install it. So let me do that, and I will be right back. Okay, so my publisher SDK has been updated to the latest version. I'm still on my product info screen on my localhost 4503. I'm just going to refresh this and confirm that we did indeed get to the same version as the author. I'm probably going to have to sign in again because this is an entirely new session. So let me do that first. So log in. And it is a super cold instance, so that took some time. Okay, so let's close this. Let's refresh the product information screen. We are indeed on 2002.4 instance. And let's go to the bundles and see if we are running with it. We are indeed, right? So our Weekend Sites project version 0.0.2 is now active. So let's refresh our failed publisher screen, and this partially works. Still seems to be missing our experience fragments, our header and our footer, presumably. So let me pause the recording once again and see why that might be happening. Okay, so we're back. In regards to the experience fragments not showing, you can see they do show now. What I had to do is I had to update my core components to the latest version. So you can see that I'm now running with 2.19. That is the latest version. So that was happening because the experience fragment, it shows up in a component. That component inherits from an out-of-the-box core components version, and we just had to have the latest one. So that's up and running. Of course, when I did install the latest version of the core components, they did conflict with the old version, 2.8.0. So what I actually had to do, I probably could have just uninstalled the old version, but rather than dealing with that, since I had a relatively new version of AEM, I just deleted it, restarted it from scratch, rebuilt it from scratch, and then built this project with the latest version of the core components, and we were up and running. So let's carry on with our dispatcher configurations and testing. The next stage here is to get our dispatcher running in localhost 8080. So for that, I need to have a Docker image running. Currently one is not running, as you can see. and I'll need to run my AEM as a cloud service, run Docker command, and that will get me going. Okay, so when I run that, again, that was based off of an alias that will create a container. And here you can see it's running in my Docker. And so when I refresh my dispatcher here on localhost 8080, we do indeed get the same page as on the publisher. Now, the last step to perform is to make sure that when we make a change here on the author server, it does reflect on the publisher and on the dispatcher. Okay, so I'm going to add a brand new component here, call it the title component. Here we go. I'm going to publish this page and refresh it here. And the title does indeed show up, which is great. And I'm gonna now also refresh my dispatcher page and make sure it shows up here too, and it does. So our end-to-end from author to publisher to dispatcher has been confirmed to be functional with our current dispatcher module, which we did have to make some tweaks to, that we copied from the out-of-the-box AEM 6.5 project. So we had to make some tweaks because, as we saw earlier, it was removed by the repository migration tool. So it's back in, and I'm now going to stop my Docker image and add that module, which you can see is still a brand new folder. I'm going to add it to my Git repository and run a build. So I'm not sure where this cache project or folder came from. What's this? Oh, okay. So this is probably generated by the Docker client. So I'm just going to ignore that. So let's just go ahead and add the dispatcher folder. I'm going to then commit dispatcher and the POM. The POM has been modified because we had to add the dispatcher Maven module to the list of modules, right? So we made that change in here. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and say that we are adding the dispatcher Maven module to the project. So that's in. I'm going to do a git push to my branch, and it's going to prompt me for username and password, as it always does, which I'm going to have to retrieve from the Cloud Manager. So this does seem to be a relatively new thing on Cloud Manager, where it prompts you for credentials as frequently as it does. I do seem to recall that not so long ago, a password would be valid for much longer, but that's no longer the case. Okay, so let's copy this password and fire it up. Okay, so it's now in my repository, and I can run a build. So from our pipelines view now, I've got my deploy to dev pipeline, which I'm just going to go ahead and run. And this should install our dispatcher module, and we can see how the details unfold. So I'll come back to this recording when this is done. Okay, so our deploy to dev pipeline has completed, and we can now go ahead and look at the author environments and make sure that a publication from there does indeed get into the publish and the dispatcher servers. So moving into the environments module here, I'm going to open up the author, the publish, and the preview. And from here, I'm going to navigate into my English homepage and open this for editing. And we're just going to add an image component as an example. So we have our image. I'll take this picture of this mountain and include it to the page, and we will confirm that that image does not currently exist on either the publish or the preview over here. And I'm going to publish this page to get this into the publisher, and there it is. So that works as expected. And for the preview, we do usually need to request a separate publication for that. So I'll do that right here from the Manage Publication screen. I'm going to request that we send this to the preview environment. Click Next and Publish, and that will wrap it up. So let's make sure that our dispatcher got it too. And there it is. So it took a few seconds, but it made it. So as we can see, we do have an end-to-end activation scheme working on our AEM as a cloud service, just like we did on our local server. So to wrap things up, let's make a change to our dispatcher configuration. We'll just add a sample rewrite. We'll make sure it works locally, and then we'll make sure it works in the cloud as well. So I'm back in my dispatcher configurations in my newly converted project, and I'm going to modify the rewrite section here. So I'm just going to add a rewrite rule that's going to apply to the /example URL, and which is going to redirect us to http example.com, and we're going to mark it as a redirect. So we'll put the r=301 flag. Okay, so that should be it. So let's first run our Docker. It's locally to test it. So we can test this out at localhost 8080/example, and it does indeed redirect us to example.com as we expected. And now we can stop our Docker. We know it works. So the next step is to push this to the cloud repository. Git commit dispatcher, edit sample rewrite. We'll do a push. And now back into our cloud manager, rather than running the entire deploy to dev pipeline, which does a full stack deployment, I, in this case, only need the dispatcher to run, to deploy rather. So I'm going to create a separate pipeline that's focused specifically on the dispatcher, and that's what the web tier is for. So we'll call this a dispatcher push, and we will select the web tier config. We'll pull it from our environment, and then here in the code location, we have to specify the location of our dispatcher files. And this is usually just /dispatcher/source, which is just the relative location of where our conf.d and conf.dispatcher.d folders exist in our repository. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to run it. In the meantime, I'm just going to confirm that this rewrite doesn't already exist. So if I run example here, it does give me a 404. And I'm just going to let this pipeline run, and we'll come back to this recording when it's done. Okay, so our dispatcher pipeline did fail. If we look at the build log, which I'm going to download right now, we can get a sense of what happened. So it's reporting that the error is up here at the top. It says the opt-in/use sources directly file is not present and the build is therefore aborted. So this use sources directly file is used to indicate to the dispatcher that it is meant to work in flexible mode, which is something that AEM as a cloud service does need. So this file, it just needs to be present. It doesn't need to have anything in particular, but it does need to be present so that we know that we can work with a more lenient set of rules. So I do have another project here that we can copy that file from. This is the structure that it's expected to be. We need an opt-in folder and a use sources directly, which, as you can see, the file is empty. So I'm just going to copy this over. Oops, not meant to cut it. Meant to copy it, and we're going to paste it in our project here under dispatcher/source. And from here, once again, I'm going to do a git add, git commit, added opt-in file. And we will now invoke that pipeline one more time. And we will resume this recording when this is complete. Okay, so after that latest modification, our dispatcher pipeline did successfully finish. So now we should just be able to simply refresh this URL, and we do indeed get redirected from our cloud environment into example.com based on the rewrite that we created in our project. So our dispatcher module has been successfully ported from the AEM 6.5 project into our AEM as a cloud service one. And it is installed using the web tier pipeline and successfully running in AEM as a cloud service. Thank you.